Okay, so now, see, Vicky here has the little white index cards. If you have a question, just raise your hand and Vicky will get you one of those cards to write your question on. Let me start, since I'm the moderator. I can start with my first question. I have a number of them, but let's see. I think I want to start with Tracy on, I thought about when you talked about the dual system that always existed in New Orleans, the Catholic schools, quote unquote private schools, and the public schools, and how since the new New Orleans school system is in place, you have a number of people that used to send their kids to private schools that are actually have their kids in these charter schools. You have more white kids, more black middle class kids that are attending these schools. Do you see a pathway to this group being the people to get us to the kind of vision that Dr. Simmons was talking to us about? Because I guess I get concerned because I see people that never had their kids in public schools, that are active citizens, that are vocal in the community, and I'm saying, what about this being the role of some of these folks? Do you see any of that happening yet in New Orleans?
I have to put on my reading glasses to see that, so I'm gonna let you go back with it, but let me say this at least. Why not? Even the public schools, the chartered schools that many in our community send our children to attend, the Lushes or the Ben Franklins or whatever, they are the quote unquote good schools. And it's and our parents get there. Karen will tell you this afternoon, it's a struggle even there. And it's selective. It's a public school, but in so many respects, it has a lot of private undercurrents. You know, you're not going to get into those selective admission at schools if you can't drive, because nobody's providing transportation. Well, for one student. We had to sue for that. But, you know, I wish those parents would look back. I say that being a parent who sent her child to not only a private school, St. Aug, but a school where they spank. So, what am I to say? What the demographics are ultimately going to look like, I don't know. We lost a lot of private or Catholic schools as well, Ann. And so, at the end of the day, what I hope for is that the folks who can't get into those schools, who just don't meet the margins, like my son would not have gotten into a Lusher, would not have gotten into a Ben Franklin, so if he went to a traditional charter public school or even a direct run, I was going to be that parent with all those letters behind a name, just galvanizing. I'm hoping that that other tier can make some changes. At the end of the day, I'll shut up with this. We talk about what those principles need to look like. We're doing that right now. I work with a charter school, Martin Luther King School, and we do alleviation of poverty, right? We do redistribution of wealth, because all the contractors happen to be African American, and we do social change because the kids come in with all the problems from the community. I mean, they come in with a social worker. They come in with issues, heavy issues. I don't know who I should go home with today. Do you have the order? It's heavy. Our community, be it the Tracy Washingtons, the Steve Jupiters, the whomever, we need to be in those schools and embracing those folks, just like we used to when I was growing up. You didn't know whose mama was a principal, whose mama was a hairdresser, whose daddy was a bus driver. We were just all in the schools together, so. We can work and do that. I rambled, I'm sorry.
Okay. Good. Okay, we have a question here from my good friend, Dr. Simmons.
I'm not your good friend, I just met you.
I'm reading, somebody out there is your good friend.
Somebody's my good friend.
Can you compare New Orleans with Detroit? Can Detroit learn any lessons, or is it going the NOLA route? the same way as New Orleans?
Well, New Orleans, you have to understand the uniqueness of the New Orleans case, the tragic uniqueness of New Orleans. I think in places like Philadelphia and Detroit, the school system and the education system, and even the economic system has been starved into fragility, and through a mechanism of state takeover. Newark is another example. Some reforms have been implemented, but the people are still there, right? And the political process is to some extent still operative, and so there is a potential for pushback that you just did not have in New Orleans, and still don't have in New Orleans. I mean, I'm trying to think. Your answer to that question about can you push back and design schools in accordance with different values. Your answer was a school level response in my school, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Trying to deal with the nature of the governance system in New Orleans, it is so fragmented and complicated. It's the Bessie runs some schools, the Orleans Parish runs some schools, the RSD runs some. So I think one strategy is to confuse and complicate and fragment the governance process so that even if you're acting as a citizen, you're not quite sure who you're acting in response.
And to make everybody else scared. Because when you do try to do that organizing, see, the best thing you could do in New Orleans is and I try to get parents to do it, but of course they're not going to. Tell them on September 25th, go to your principal, your charter leader, and tell them if you don't meet my demands, I'm pulling my child, my economic tool, and the $10,000 and all my friends here. All you need is about 19 others. All you need, take away that much money out of a school, they will stand up. But the fear is how they get us. You're not going to get 20 parents in a school to do that because they're scared. Where am I going to put my child? What am I going to do? That's a system-wide.
Right,
A system-wide thing would tell all of these parents, we can organize. And all you got to do is take 10 out of your school, 10 out of your school, 10 out of your school. But that's hard.
But
because that's just one system to go to. I can't,
But I'm sitting here, now this is where you have to use your imagination. I'm looking at a map from the Cowan Institute's 2014 report on New Orleans describing the racial and ethnic composition of the schools in New Orleans, right? And orange is like the school is 95% above African American. When you look at this map, it's the vast majority of schools are almost 95% African American, right? Then there are these small pockets of schools that are over 40% white. What this means
That's not small pockets, that's three.
That's three, right? So I'll say this. I'll try to be kind. It says, here's what it says. Only 4 schools in the city fell into the representative of NOLA category, meaning there are only 4 schools where the population of students is representative of the population of the community. The vast majority of schools are overwhelmingly African American, right? And so for African American parents to act on a system by saying, I'm going to withdraw my child from schools, if there aren't other schools. So in essence, you have to operate at the system level is the point I am trying to make. You cannot negotiate system change in a structure that has distributed governance to over 60 schools, right? The other, I want to get back to this issue of values, because people easily say, oh yeah, we need a different set of values, right? And then the question is, so which ones, right? And I just want to share the values that my colleague Beth Glenn and several others and I on the show, Petty, developed for the Alliance for Smart Schools, Communities, and Systems, to show you how distinctly different a set of values can be from pupil-based accountability, options for choice, things of that sort. So I'll just read a few of them. What principles should guide our effort? One principle: self-reflection, humility, dialogue, and growth. And that's one that I see violated all the time. A group of experts parachutes in, They see themselves as experts, meaning they've never made a mistake, and that's what an expert. I never describe myself as an expert. I describe myself as a person with expertise, meaning I've made so many mistakes that I have experience and wisdom and knowledge, and I can share with you my mistakes so that you won't make them and we can make new ones together. But this issue of people who come with humility, the ability to have dialogue, that each actor and change agent in educational systems must be committed to deep, ongoing self-reflection, openness to dialogue, humility, and shifts in thinking. I don't see that in very many places around the country. Right? Another one, a strengths-based belief and investment in children, youth, and adults. Peggy's piece was all about a view of the African-American community that was pejorative, a view that they don't have the wherewithal to solve their own problems, and thus experts need to bypass their rights as citizens and impose a solution on them. So this strengths-based belief and investment in children, belief in all students as thoughtful, powerful learners and citizens, that all people, regardless of race, ethnicity, social status, national origin, have the inherent wisdom, capacity, and the right to help co-create a social system in a collective fashion, right? Those are just two values that are fundamentally different from the values used to organize and define what community engagement means. The values used to actually, Doug, you asked me a question in the elevator this morning as I was coming down, taking a walk. I said, what did you think of the conference that he convened? What was it, in June, late June? So I was just putting content aside, I was shocked at the optics, right? That the vast majority of people in the room were white, both in the audience and on the panel. You look at the vast majority of who's in these schools, right? And therefore the adults that are being served by these schools, you would think that a conference on the urban future of, of New Orleans and its implications nationally would have at least a population that mirrors the vast majority of the schools, over 95%, right? The fact that it didn't, I think, shows the extent to which the African American community feels dispossessed.
I don't even know what conference you're talking about. So.
Go to the second panel. Go to the second panel. I think it showed to me the extent to which I just don't know how you have that happen, right? That maybe it's a transportation system. I don't know. Did you charge a fee for the meeting? You did not. It was an open meeting, and therefore
no, it wasn't an open meeting.
It was not an open. It was by invitation. It was by invitation. I don't know. We'll clarify that in the next session. Nonetheless, the fact that you can have, first of all, it's unclear for people who's invited, who's not invited, who can come, who can't come. And then the final result is it's a meeting that I saw as, well, this is a large number of white people discussing the future of New Orleans and its implications nationally. You would expect more diversity in and of itself. And I'm not talking about content. Much of the content, I couldn't, I had some quarrels with some of the content, but not others. I'm simply talking about what the attendance represented about who feels engaged and empowered. And that alone is something that fundamentally has to change, because in essence, that supports the notion that color blindness is appropriate, right? That it's appropriate to have a meeting about schools that are largely attended by African Americans, but most African Americans don't bother to come to the meeting.
I push back only to this extent.
Go ahead.
I don't care if other folks have that type of meeting. What I care about is whether we can organize those black folks to have their own meeting.
Okay.
I want us to have a meeting about, no one could tell Tracy Washington about the education of Jacob Matthew Washington. I want the black community of parents to feel that strongly about the education of their children, so that no matter what other conferences had and who gets the invitation and how exclusive it is, as far as I'm concerned, they could be playing bridge. They're not going to control our education. And we have to get to that point, organizing ourselves and controlling our resources.
Okay. We have time for one more question before we move to our next panel, and this is for both of you. And first of all, on diversity, I'm going to do a commercial right now for the Albert Shanker Institute. Their next series and report is on teacher diversity across the country. Very important report. Anyway, Tracy and Warren, how will we begin to educate the public about the threat of privatization if we don't decry what has happened to black children and public education in New Orleans, D.C., Florida? We can't ignore history.
That's deep. You go.
Well, I would say one of the things that is important is that we have to begin telling our stories and documenting our stories in a far better way than we have to date. What I think you have seen over the last decade in New Orleans is a story of success published in the national media. That has a set of sources that it attends to on a regular basis. I think the other side of the story hasn't been documented, organized, cataloged, and voiced. And so we are at a communications disadvantage at this point, because I saw lots of stories leading up to what you call the anniversary, or whatever you want to call it, commemoration. I saw lots of stories in the media touting the great success of New Orleans, both economically and educationally. Right? And so if I'm reading the Wall Street Journal or to some extent the Washington Post or the New York Times, my picture of New Orleans is fundamentally different than the pictures that the two of you just painted, right? And so we need to do a much better job, which means, I think, taking the storytelling out of the hands, unfortunately, of academics. Because we like to take 2 years to collect lots of data and write 30-page articles with arcane language. And the other side is producing summaries, pseudo-research pieces, and that stuff is out there on a weekly basis, and they're convening meetings. And so they have their whole communication enterprise, they have their think tank enterprise, they have media outlets, and they also have prominent people in the world of politics and culture that voice their concerns, and black and brown people among them. So I think that one of the things that I'm starting to do is to begin to form a network of new urban philanthropists. These are artists and entertainers, people who are from these communities, who have some money and are giving back, but what they have more, like the people like John Legend and Common and others, is a lot of social cultural capital. But the people who have been informing their vision are less likely to be people like you and more likely to be people who are their agents, who are then tied to another infrastructure. They're beginning to understand the need to shift, but they want to understand what to shift to, and they need support from community organizers, from people who do applied research to help them create a new vision and voice that vision. And I think organizing is certainly part of that. I think certainly the work in New York City around community organizing, CEJ, Alliance Organizing Project, demonstrates the power of that when you do it in partnership with others, with unions, with progressive researchers and others. But you do have to strengthen yourself internally before you can form strategic alliances with others.
You have to have resources. You have to do well to do good. I mean, that's just the bottom line. Has the narrative been out, between Twitter, between Facebook, between writing, between putting it on the Katrina Truth blog, between showing up at Atlantic Philanthropies, Melissa Harris Perry, Chris Hayes, you name the articles. We got to get people educated enough to understand what they're listening to. Because at the end of the day, they got to know what. I've gone to graduate school, so now I get the stats, right? So we got to figure out ways to teach these people, teach our communities. Now that's a lie. If you start with 100 children in 9th grade and you end up with 10 and 10 graduate, yes, 100% of your students graduated, if you want to count it that way. But we got to teach our communities how to do that, right? And if we don't do that, then they'll still buy anything. And I agree with you.
we got a lot of work to do.
Leo, any thoughts? You channeling Peggy right now, or any other thoughts you want to add?
I think, there is certainly a reality that Peggy analyzed in terms of, as she says, the unmaking of a community of rights-bearing citizens. But there's also a reality of resistance to that process. And so I think, going through this morning, preparing to do this, it reminded me of how deeply ashamed I felt during those days after Katrina when I looked at the television and I said, this is going on in a country in which I'm a citizen and I share in the responsibility for what's happening. And so I think it's important to keep that memory alive in these 10-year celebrations. But it's also important to remember the tradition of resistance to that and the fact that there are folks always willing to stand up and say, you can't define who I am, and I am a citizen.
That's right.
And I do have rights, and you have to respect them.
I wanted to share one quick story that you just reminded me of, Leo. Right after Katrina, when we were working with UTNO and trying to get the schools open, as Tracy mentioned, one of the first schools to open was M.L. King Charter School. They got the money. Tracy was working at that school, and some of the first people that came down to help us and try to figure out how to get the schools back open was the local president of New York City at the time, was Randy Weingarten, and her vice president, Leo Casey. And we went to M.L. King, and you met Tracy. I don't know if y'all remember each other, but you actually met Tracy that day. So here we are, 10 years later. I really want us to just really focus in on something that Dr. Simmons said, I think, that we have to look forward. We have to both understand what happened and know it well, and we have to figure out this vision for moving forward, not only for our community in New Orleans, but for communities across the country. This idea, as you said, it keeps getting rehashed. We're fighting it everywhere. And to be able to be the truth seekers out there, fighting and explaining that this is not the way to educate, and the community must be at the table, I just implore all of us to take from this conversation that thought. And we're going to welcome, don't leave, because we have more to talk about from another perspective about New Orleans. So any final questions? If not, you can ask them to the next panel. They may know the answers. But let's first of all give a round to our panelists, Dr. Simmons and Tracy Washington. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Y'all thought I wasn't.